Hi chickens, I'm not gonna lie, this is a massive subject, there are many layers to it and there are lots of points that I want to make, so I'm just gonna dive straight into it. A lot of people have asked me in the run-up to Self-Love September to address the difference between self-love and selfishness or arrogance or narcissism. A lot of people have said that they don't know where to draw the line or where the line is between being self-loving and being selfish or self-serving or self-centered or any of those other things. A lot of people have also said that they don't want to come across as arrogant or as narcissistic, and they kind of worry that, you know, adopting a practice of self-love and making self-loving choices is going to put them in that kind of territory. So I thought this was a really interesting topic, and I thought this was something that I could really sink my teeth into this year. So if you feel like this is something that affects you and that you have thought about and you have kind of, you know, struggled over and dabbled with, then a lot of the stuff that I have to say in this video is for you. For a lot of people, the word selfish has an inherently negative connotation, and it's really difficult for some people to actually remove the negativity from the way that they view the word in a semantic sense. To me, it's not really like that, because after my mother went to therapy and got a lot of her stuff sorted out and set a lot of her boundaries and understood where her dysfunctional relationship patterns were and stuff like that, my mum kind of reclaimed the word selfish and she started to use it in a very empowering way. And so that's kind of the way that I have used it as well in my life. So for example, my mum would say something along the lines of, I'm just going to have to be selfish in this situation. I'm going to make the selfish choice for my own kind of, you know, physical, emotional or spiritual well-being. So she would actually kind of own it, you know, and because of that, my own personal perception of what selfish means as a word is not wholly negative. Of course, it does have negative connotations, but for me, it also has very positive connotations. But I do think a lot of the time that it's important to understand that being selfish, in terms of, you know, putting yourself first, putting yourself at the centre of your decision-making process, deciding what would be right for you, what would be the self-caring or self-loving choice for you, those things aren't bad. Those things are not inherently bad. Is it convenient for a lot of people in a lot of situations for you to assume that putting yourself first is bad? Yes. Yes, it is highly, highly convenient. In the workplace, for example, it is very convenient sometimes for a boss to be in a position whereby an employee on his or her team feels bad for putting their own emotional needs first or physical health first, you know. It's good for productivity, it's good for the interests of the business. You know, if people feel selfish, for example, about taking time off when they're ill, or if people feel selfish with regard to asking to cut back on their work, then the likelihood is that they won't do it because they'll be afraid of being considered to be selfish, or they'll be afraid of going down a path that seems like it could be selfish. And that's very convenient for the interests of the corporate structure if people, you know, worry about being selfish through doing the right thing for themselves and therefore refrain from doing the right thing for themselves. In family dynamics, you know, it can quite often be highly convenient for a family member if you feel selfish for doing something for yourself, or if you feel like you can't step away from the family drama because it would be a selfish thing to do. If you've convinced yourself that you constantly need to compromise and sacrifice and so on because any other decision would be selfish and that's not in alignment with who you want to be, you know, quite often, for sure, people will be highly convenienced by that. And this is why sometimes you'll get into a situation where you'll finally decide to do the right thing for yourself and put yourself first, and somebody will turn around and say, you're selfish, that's selfish, how dare you be so selfish, how dare you just think of yourself, that's selfish. It's very easy to throw that word around, you know, it's easy for people to throw that word around when they see that you're doing something loving for yourself and actually that doesn't serve their interest, that is not advantageous for them. So sometimes the word selfish is thrown around in that way in order to kind of, you know, to exert control over somebody who is doing the self-loving thing for themselves. And that's probably something that may have happened in many of your lives. It certainly happened in mine, where I've started to kind of put myself more at the centre of the equation and think about what's important for me, and I have had that accusation levelled against me that I'm selfish. You've really got to own your desire to do the right thing for yourself and your entitlement to do the right thing for yourself, and that can be difficult. There are certain professions which kind of demand that you put yourself first. nurses, for example, carers of all different kinds, people who care for family members or people who do care in the community, social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists. These people need to be rested up and refueled themselves. They need to make sure that their own tank is full so that they can give of themselves in their professional situation or in that part of their personal life where they are adopting a caring role. In the work that I do, it is absolutely essential that my own tank is full, that I think of myself, that I consider spending my time doing what is self-loving for me, so that I can give of myself to my clients. This is so important. You can't run on fumes and try and give other people what little you have left. You can't give nothing to yourself, have nothing for yourself, and still profess to be able to give so abundantly and so overwhelmingly to others. That African proverb, never trust a naked man who offers you his shirt, or something to that effect. It's very true. It's important for me to be self-serving and to think of myself and to be interested in my own, my own kind of prosperity and my own health and my own sense of what I need. It's important for me to do those things in order to be able to serve in a wider sense. And so essentially, if you're not being selfish to some extent, if you are constantly putting others before yourself, then it's likely that you're trying to give something to others that you don't even have for yourself, and that makes no sense. One of my key pieces of advice that I would give to anyone out there who's considering living life from a more self-serving standpoint, putting yourself more at the centre of your decision making and showing up for your needs and your desires a little more, is to be prepared to be vocal about the fact that you're making those kinds of decisions. Let people know that you are doing it from a conscious place, exactly the same way my mother did when she said things like, well, I'm just going to have to be selfish in this situation. I've got to think of myself in this situation. That's a very empowered thing for somebody to do. It's very bold to say that kind of stuff. It shows that you're behind your choice. And even if you're not 100% behind your choice, even if you still fear what people are going to think of you, deep down you know that you have to come from a more self-serving place, because there is something more important than what other people think of you. There's something more important than the shadow shit that somebody might want to, attack you with or throw at you because you did something self-serving. And that important thing is how you feel, what you need, and the fact that you've been abandoning those concerns for way too long. So, I think it's important to be able to be vocal about the fact that you're doing what you're doing for a specific reason and you're doing it consciously. And I'm not talking about justifying it, and I'm not talking about explaining it away. You've got to get behind your choice, and you've got to show people that you're behind your choice. Many's the time that I have vocalised the fact that I'm going to do what's best for me in a situation, even though it might not necessarily be what other people want me to do or what would be most convenient for them. In that moment, I need to think of myself. I need to put my own needs first. I feel intuitively, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, physically, that's what I need to do, and that's what I'm going to do. It takes to be vocal about it, and it takes to be bold about it and get behind your choice. The more you get behind your choices, the more other people come to learn that they can't convince you that your choices are needlessly selfish. You know what I mean? People who people that you're inconveniencing through doing the more self-serving and self-loving thing may try and beat you over the head with your own decision by trying to convince you that it's selfish. If you vocalise your decision first and you explain why you're doing it and that you're not going to budge on it, then it's going to be far less likely that other people are going to try and get in there and convince you that it's selfish. If you own it first, then other people will learn that they have to like it or lump it. You might shock people at first, when you start to be more self-serving and more self-interested. You might shock people at first. But there's a very big difference between being selfish in this all-consuming, overt way where you never think of anybody else and you're not interested in anybody else, a narcissistic selfishness. There's a massive difference between that and you just knowing on an emotionally intelligent level that you need to do what's best for you, that some sacrifices are too much, some compromises are too great. That you are the only person that is going to be on your deathbed. Nobody is going to share your deathbed with you. You will be there alone. And when you are there, you must know that you did the self-loving thing for yourself sometimes, that you didn't allow yourself to become some exhausted martyr, some victim who constantly put everybody else first, even when you were exhausted and in need of solace and in need of reprieve and in need of relaxation. You've got to get real with yourself, and sometimes I think deathbed perspective serves that purpose very much. I think the main thing about people's worry that they have about being selfish, unintentionally being selfish when they're trying to be self-loving, is the thought of what other people will think, you know. I think it's more about, well, will people think I'm being selfish if I do this, you know? Will people see me as somebody who is only self-serving and has no interest in compromising or trying to help anybody else with their needs? And my feeling with this is that, in a way, we have to be pioneers. We have to be pioneers for self-love. There are lots of cross-sections of society and lots of situations and lots of relationships which actually villainize self-love, because if you do the self-loving thing, if you pay attention to your needs, if you become conscious of what it is that you require, it does inconvenience a lot of people who would far rather that you did what they want you to do. It does inconvenience a lot of institutions. It does inconvenience a lot of different parts of mainstream culture if you think of yourself and if you think of your deeper needs. You know, so I think in a sense we have to be pioneers, and we have to understand that sometimes when we choose to make a more self-loving choice, we will get shadow shit thrown at us. We will, okay? That is kind of inevitable. And what you've got to do is stand strong and stand firm in your entitlement to make a self-loving choice, and know that there is something deeper and more important than what other people think of you here, okay? This is a choice that is way bigger than somebody else feeling inconvenienced or, you know, feeling as though they don't want you to change into a more self-loving and self-serving person. When you are a pioneer in any way, when you are somebody who is willing to go against the grain and break down a negative cycle and deprogram, decondition what you have learned, particularly about self-love and things of that nature, some people are not going to appreciate it. And I think it's important to get honest and get clear about that actually right from the start, is that some people are not going to appreciate it. If everybody appreciated you suddenly living a self-loving life, you know, in which you kind of filtered your decisions through the core of yourself and tried to work out whether or not they were truly loving for you, if that was like easy to do and people appreciated it, then you would do it, right? You wouldn't be watching this video right now. You would just do it because there would be no resistance to it, because everybody would accept you for doing it and it would be something that other people could appreciate. Quite often it's not. Quite often, you know, we are expected to compromise too much. We are expected to sacrifice too much. We are expected in some way or another, in some aspect of our lives, to suppress our emotions and just get the fuck on with it, you know. And I think, like, when we actually wake up and stand up and be bold and say, I've got to do this for myself. You know, that's the choice that I'm making. I'm listening to myself, I'm checking in with myself, and I know this is what I need to do for me. Then I think that is a pioneering thing to do. I think that is a beautiful thing to do. I think that we can get shadow shit thrown at us when we do that. And I think it's important to recognise that, be real about that, and go ahead regardless. You have to be strong in your choices, you know? And what I would say about operating in a self-loving way on the daily is that it has to start somewhere, and there is never a really easy time. It has to start somewhere, and wherever it starts there is going to be resistance and there is going to be fear, but you have to feel the fear and do it anyway. You have to, as I quite often love to say, ride your fear like a power horse. Get some reins on it and ride it like a power horse, because there never is going to be an easy time. The sooner you get clear on that, then I think the sooner the fog starts to clear and you see everything with a lot more clarity, and you can really tune in and connect with your strong intention. Now I want to talk about arrogance and narcissism, which was kind of the other things that people explained to me that they were worried about with regard to self-love, that they didn't want to become arrogant or narcissistic, that they were worried that they were going to blur that line if they started showing up for themselves more and making more self-loving choices. The thing that I really want to convey to you is that arrogance and narcissism are actually the polar opposite of self-love. The more you love yourself and start to show up for yourself in a real way, the less arrogant and narcissistic you become. The less you can actually entertain arrogance and narcissism in your psyche. And here's why. Arrogance is basically a superiority complex. It's a sense that you're better than other people. And quite often it comes with this strong competitive paradigm where you feel like you need to compete with other people, you need to prove yourself against other people, and you maybe need to drag other people down a peg or two in order for you yourself to kind of conserve that arrogant idea that you are better. Narcissism is self-obsession. It's just an interest in nobody else but yourself, and it involves a lot of deluded, grandiose ideas about yourself, you know, a complete loss of perspective, megalomania in a lot of cases, and basically selfishness to the pure and simple detriment of anybody else's needs or anybody else's feelings. It also accompanies with it usually a complete lack of empathy for other people's pain. In both cases, the surface pastiche of confidence, the surface parody, the grotesque disguise of confidence and of self-esteem is actually a cover-up for shame, for feelings of rejection, for fear, for inferiority complexes. Arrogant and narcissistic people are addicted to compliments and to attention from others, because that is the fuel that they need to prop up their very fragile sense of self that they have constructed in order to run away from the underlying psychological pain that they are in and the emotional pain that they feel. They crave outside validation because that validation props up this fragile sense of who they are. Like, it helps them run from the underlying fear that they are worthless, that deep down they are not what they're projecting themselves to be. Self-love is the opposite. Self-love is you filling your tank up to the top with your own validation, with your own approval. You don't need outside validation. You don't need to run on that shitty fuel and become addicted to that shitty fuel. You validate yourself, you approve of yourself. When you love yourself, then compliments from other people are nice, but they're not the fuel that you need. Compliments no longer make or break your sense of self when you are self-loving, because your tank is full, whether or not people approve of you. Your tank is full when you walk into a room. You don't need to worry about, will other people accept me, and if they don't accept me, does that mean that I'm not acceptable in some way, that I'm not worthy in some way? When you love yourself, you don't take that baggage around with you. Arrogance and narcissism are the symptoms in a person. They are the symptoms of the psyche, a psyche in which that feeling is carried around, you know? Arrogance and narcissism purely and simply are symptoms. They are symptoms that manifest in people who don't have that deep sense of self-permission, self-love. So they are looking for it, and they're constructing a reality which appears to affirm and confirm that they do feel those things. In fact, they don't, because if they did feel those things, then they would not be knee-deep in the competition paradigm. They would not be trying to tear other people down. They would be able to be interested in other people and give love and support to other people, because they would have enough in the tank to do that. Narcissistic, arrogant people don't have enough in the tank for others. They can only think about and prop up themselves and their sense of selves and their own agendas. When you're self-loving, the opposite is true. You can give because you're overflowing. You're overflowing with abundance, with wealth, internal wealth, mental wealth that you can give to others. Arrogance and narcissism are not signs of wealth, they're signs of poverty. The more you love yourself, the less arrogant you are. If arrogance is superiority, if arrogance is that sense of being better than, then I would say the more you love yourself, the less you harbour those feelings, the less you walk around in the world like that. And the more you love yourself, the more you feel inspired to help other people love themselves. And the more you love yourself, the more you walk gently in the world and you walk consciously in the world. So would I say that self-love has anything to do with arrogance or narcissism? Absolutely not. I would say that they're complete opposite ends of the scale. I would say that arrogance and narcissism are parodies of self-love. They are like, you know, covers. They are kind of like disguises that say self-love all over them, but they have nothing whatsoever to do with it. And let me just bring this full circle by coming back to something that I said about selfishness. When I was talking about selfishness, I said that a lot of people, and in a lot of situations, and in a lot of parts of society, your desire to consider your own needs will be labelled as selfish, because your desire to consider your own needs is inconveniencing for a lot of people. Sometimes it would be better for others if you didn't think of yourself. And so when you try to think of yourself, some people will be tempted and quick to label you as selfish. And a lot of people let that get under their skin, and they convince themselves that being interested in their own needs is selfish. And so quite a lot of the time this attack works, okay? In the same way that your desire to listen to your own needs and respect your own limitations can be labelled as selfish in situations where it's inconveniencing to others, so too can your confidence and your sense of empowerment and your sense of owning your potential and your sense of not putting up with bullshit. Those things can be mislabelled as arrogance, and some people who are inconvenienced by your sense of personal power and your sense of what it is that you will and won't put up with will be quick to label those behaviours as arrogant in you. And you've got to think about the fact that sometimes you're really pressing people's shadow buttons when you start to get empowered. Because a lot of people in this world aren't empowered and they don't feel entitled to be. They're not confident and they don't feel entitled to be. So when you start to actually adjust your sense of who you are, what you're capable of, what you deserve, what you won't put up with, yeah, sure, some people are going to throw their shadow shit at you. They are going to accuse you of being arrogant. They might talk behind your back and say, God, he or she is so arrogant. But again, you've got to decide, what's the bigger picture? What is the bigger picture? Confidence, empowerment, a sense of where your limits are, a sense of going after what you need, what enriches you, what makes your soul sing. These things in the end are more important than what a few people might say about your newfound confidence and your newfound empowerment and your newfound sense of joy. I hope that I have been able to adequately explain the connections between selfishness, narcissism, arrogance, self-love, and where the land lies and where the terrain is with regard to that. And I really hope that this video has been helpful and has cleared up a lot of the queries and the questions that a lot of you guys have. And so very much love and self-love. Blessed be.